We are using this period now to make the economic and fiscal policy choices that are appropriate to our circumstances at the current time. So first of all, we are doing this 100 years after most other people. So we recognize that we have, as I've always said, two looming horizons. The first is a finite resource, and secondly, a finite resource whose sell-by date is now more looming than it was 100 years ago. We're living in a world that is more climate conscious, and the more climate conscious world in which we live is one in which fossil fuels are likely to have a finite sell-by date. We're using this period to ensure that we do just that. We put in place the prerequisites to have a competitive, a globally competitive, non-oil economy for the long term. And that includes very significant decisions on the subject of fiscal choices, what we invest in. So you will see, for example, that we're investing very heavily in infrastructure. Firstly, transport infrastructure. So you will know, for example, that we're very significantly investing in transport infrastructure, like I said, including a road that will connect us to northern Brazil. And we're working with our Surinamese counterparts to bridge the Currentine River so that you can drive to Suriname. You can drive to Suriname, you don't have to take a ferry. We want you to be able to drive by road and bridge to get to Suriname. And those discussions are very advanced. What that does is it immediately expands manifold the economic space in which you're operating. And so any company that's operating and investing in Guyana will now essentially be seamlessly, physically able to access northern Brazil and the rest of Brazil by extension, Suriname and French Guyana. And of course, we're investing, and there are private investors in port infrastructure that will improve marine and maritime linkages with the rest of the Caribbean. You would know that discussions are at a very advanced stage regarding the introduction of a ferry service from Trinidad to Guyana and involving other islands in the Caribbean. So transport infrastructure to improve access to neighboring countries, neighboring markets, and to increase the economic space in which every economic actor in Guyana is operating. Energy infrastructure, one, because the economy is growing so rapidly that our demand for energy has long outstripped our capacity to supply. And two, because our energy infrastructure is also old and inefficient and still heavily dependent on fossil fuels. And so, investing in energy infrastructure, and in particular electricity generation, so we're building out a new 300 megawatt power plant fueled by our gas resources. We're investing in about 100 megawatts of solar energy in various locations, particularly for off-grid locations. We are still committed to developing the Amila Falls hydropower project, which will add another 156 megawatts of hydropower. But on the whole, without going into excessive details, investing in energy infrastructure to ensure the availability of adequate, reliable, and more affordable energy. We anticipate with the completion of the gas-to-energy project that we will be able to reduce the cost of electricity to the private sector and to household consumers by 50%. That, as you can imagine, will mean a complete revolution for Guyana's manufacturing sector, because as you know, we have historically been a producer and exporter of primary commodities. The single biggest impediment to the emergence of a competitive manufacturing sector has been the availability of adequate electricity and the competitiveness cost of that electricity. We're on the verge. By next year, we will have addressed that impediment and removed it by putting in place, like I said, this additional 300 megawatts of power and by reducing electricity tariffs by half. But we were already, long before oil was discovered, was already firmly and unswervingly focused on the task of building out a competitive, diversified, and therefore resilient economy in the pre-oil era. An economy, an environment that is competitive and attractive for doing business, and an economy that is globally competitive and diversified and therefore resilient. And as investors, as sophisticated investors, I wanted to emphasize that point, that all too often there is the notion that the Guyana story is about the discovery of oil. Guyana needs to be cautious to manage its oil resources carefully, which is great. We don't have a problem with that. We agree with you. But we know what it is to be in very difficult economic circumstances. As a country, as a government, and as policymakers. And we have done a lot of heavy lifting in the past to put Guyana in a place where we were already on the path to achieving those objectives before I was discovered.